One signature. That was all it took to end her life as she knew it. Clara thought she was saving her family. She thought she was signing a simple loan agreement to keep the wolves from her door. But she didn't check the fine print, and she didn't look up to see the predator watching her from the shadows. When the ink dried, she wasn't just a debtor. She was a possession. She signed the wrong document, and the most dangerous duke in London refused to void it. He didn't want her money. He wanted her, and in the game of power, love is the most dangerous trap of all. The rain in London didn't wash things clean. It only made the grime on the cobblestones slicker, more treacherous. It was fitting, Clara Whitmore thought, as she pulled her thin woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. She was standing before the imposing iron gates of Blackwood House, a structure that looked less like a home and more like a fortress built to keep the world out. Or perhaps keep secrets in. Clara checked the small velvet pouch at her waist. Inside was the last of her mother's jewelry, a pearl brooch that wasn't worth a fraction of what her father owed. But it was a gesture, a down payment, a plea for mercy. "You have to be brave, Clara," she whispered to herself, her breath misting in the frigid October air, "for Thomas." Her younger brother, Thomas, was currently sitting in a damp cell in Fleet Prison. His crime? Inheriting a mountain of debt from their reckless late father and having the audacity to be poor. The creditor holding the note was the Duke of Ashford, a man known in polite society as the Iron Duke and in the darker corners of London as the Devil of Blackwood. Sebastian Blackwood. Rumours swirled around him like smoke. They said he had doubled his family's fortune by bankrupting his rivals. They said he had no heart, only a ledger where his soul should be. And they said he never, ever forgave a debt. Clara rang the bell. The sound was a hollow clang that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Moments later, a butler with a face carved from granite opened the door. He didn't ask who she was. He seemed to be expecting her. "Miss Whitmore, His Grace is waiting in the study." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was ushered through a hallway that smelled of beeswax, old leather, and something metallic, like the scent of a storm before it breaks. The house was painfully silent. There were no servants bustling about, no laughter, no warmth. It was a tomb of mahogany and velvet. The butler opened a heavy oak door and stepped aside. The study was vast, lined floor to ceiling, with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it provided little light. Standing by the window, with his back to her, was the Duke. He was taller than she imagined. His shoulders were broad, straining against the fabric of a darkly tailored coat. Even from behind, he radiated a chaotic energy that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. "I expected you an hour ago, Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but scraping, like velvet dragged over gravel. The rain, Your Grace," Clara stammered, stepping further into the room, "and the carriage was delayed." He turned slowly. Clara's breath hitched. Sebastian Blackwood was devastatingly handsome, but in a way that felt dangerous. He had sharp, angular cheekbones and hair the colour of midnight, but it was his eyes that froze her. Steel grey, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He looked at her, not as a woman, but as an equation he was trying to solve. "Excuses are a currency I do not accept," Sebastian said, walking toward his massive desk. He didn't offer her a seat. "You are here about the debt." "I am," Clara said, finding her spine. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the brooch. She placed it on the desk with a trembling hand. "This is a down payment. It belonged to my grandmother. I am asking, begging Your Grace, for an extension. Thomas is sick. The prison dampness is killing him. If you release the claim, I can work. I can pay you back every farthing. I just need time." Sebastian looked at the brooch with disdain, not even touching it. "I have no use for trinkets, Miss Whitmore. And I have no use for time. Your father's debt is £3,000. This bauble is worth 12. Clara felt the tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Then take the house. It's all we have left. The deed to the cottage indistinct, sorry. It's small, but the land is good." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. He seemed to assess her, his gaze dropping to her frayed cuffs and then back to her determined face. A strange flicker of emotion crossed his face, something like regret, or perhaps resolve, before it vanished behind his iron mask. "The cottage," he mused. "Yes, that might suffice to settle the account." Clara nearly collapsed with relief. You will take it? And release Thomas?" "I will," Sebastian said. He gestured to a solicitor who had been sitting so quietly in the shadowed corner that Clara hadn't even noticed him. "Mr. Finch has the papers drawn up." Mr. Finch, a small man with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes, scurried forward, placing a thick document on the desk. He dipped a quill into an ink pot and held it out to Clara. "Sign at the bottom, Miss Whitmore," Finch squeaked, "and the debt is wiped clean. Your brother will be released by morning." Clara rushed to the desk. She was so eager, so desperate to end this nightmare, that the words on the page swam before her eyes. The legal script was dense, the calligraphy looping and difficult to decipher in the dim light. "It is standard transfer protocol," Sebastian said, his voice dropping lower, almost hypnotic. He was standing right beside her now, his presence overwhelming. A simple exchange of assets. "Your signature for his freedom." My signature for his freedom. That was all that mattered. Clara gripped the quill. Her hand shook as she pressed the nib to the parchment. The scratching sound was loud in the quiet room. She signed her name, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore. She set the quill down and looked up at the Duke, a tentative smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Your Grace. You don't know what this means." "I think I do," Sebastian interrupted. He reached past her, not to shake her hand, but to snatch the document from the desk. He blew on the ink to dry it, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach drop. He folded the paper and slipped it into his breast pocket. "Mr. Finch," Sebastian said, never looking away from Clara. "See to it that the carriage is brought around. Her Grace will be needing her things brought from her lodgings." Clara blinked. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I beg your pardon," Clara asked, her voice trembling. "My things? I am returning to my lodgings. I have to meet Thomas." Sebastian stepped closer. The air between them crackled. He towered over her, consuming all the light in the room. "You aren't going anywhere, Clara," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. It sounded possessive on his tongue. "I don't understand." She stepped back, bumping into the heavy desk. "I signed the deed transfer. The house is yours. The debt is paid." Sebastian's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile. "You really should have read the document, my dear," he whispered. "You didn't sign a deed transfer. You signed a marriage settlement. And by the power of the special license attached, you and I are now man and wife." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara gripped the edge of the mahogany desk, her knuckles turning white. The roar of the blood in her ears drowned out the crackle of the fire. That's not funny," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am not known for my humor," Sebastian replied coldly. He turned and walked toward the fireplace, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He took a slow sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. Clara looked at Mr. Finch, the solicitor. The little man was hastily packing his bag, refusing to meet her eyes. "Mr. Finch," she cried out, Tell him it was a mistake. I signed over the cottage." "The document was quite clear, Your Grace," Finch mumbled, bowing low to Sebastian before scuttling towards the door. "The terms were the total erasure of debt in exchange for the hand and loyalty of Miss Clara Whitmore. It is binding, legally flawless. Good day, Your Grace, my lady." The door clicked shut, leaving Clara alone with the monster. Panic, hot and bright, surged through her. She lunged for the door, her fingers grasping the cold brass handle. Locked. She spun around, her chest heaving. "Open this door! This is madness! You cannot trap me into a marriage I did not agree to." "You did agree," Sebastian said calmly, setting his glass down. "You signed. In front of a witness." "I was tricked," Clara shouted, her fear transmuting into fury. She marched toward him, stopping only inches away from his imposing frame. "Why? Why would you do this? You have money, you have power. Why would the Duke of Ashford want a destitute spinster with a ruined family name?" Sebastian's expression hardened. The indifference vanished, replaced by a flash of something volatile. He closed the distance between them, grabbing her wrist. His grip was firm, not painful, but inescapable. "Because, Clara," he hissed, his face inches from hers, "I need a wife. Specifically, I need a wife who has absolutely nowhere else to go. A wife who cannot leave me because she has no means to survive outside these walls." "There are hundreds of women who would line up to marry a duke," she spat, trying to twist her wrist free. "Women who talk," Sebastian countered. "Women with powerful fathers and inquisitive brothers. Women who want to change me, or spend my fortune, or spy on me for my enemies." "You?" He looked her up and down, his gaze stripping her bare. "You are desperate. You are loyal to your brother above all else. That makes you useful." "Useful?" Clara felt sick. "Is that all I am? A tool?" "We are all tools in someone's hand," he said, releasing her wrist abruptly. He walked back to the window, staring out at the rain. "My uncle Lord Reginald is contesting my legitimacy. He claims my father was never legally married to my mother. If I do not produce a wife and show stability, if I do not secure the Blackwood line immediately, he will petition the crown to strip me of everything. The title, the estate, the power." He turned back to face her. "I needed a wife by midnight tonight. You needed £3,000. It is a transaction, nothing more." Clara stared at him in horror. "You bought me, like a horse." "I bought your brother's life," Sebastian corrected sharply. "Do not forget that. If you walk out that door, which I can unlock right now, I will shred that document. The debt remains. Thomas stays in Fleet Prison, and given his coughing, he will be dead within the month." The ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Clara felt her legs give out. She sank into a nearby velvet armchair, burying her face in her hands. He was right. He had checkmated her. If she annulled this fraud, Thomas died. If she accepted it, she sentenced herself to a life with a cold, manipulative tyrant. "Why me?" she asked through her fingers. Surely there was someone else. Sebastian was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, losing some of its sharp edge. "Because, Clara, I remember you." Clara looked up, confusion knitting her brow. You do?" "5 years ago," Sebastian said, his eyes distant. "At the opera. You were wearing a blue dress. You bumped into me in the foyer. You didn't know who I was. You apologized and you laughed. You didn't look at me with fear or greed or lust. You just saw a man." He looked at her directly. "I need someone who is capable of seeing the truth, even when it is inconvenient. And I need someone who knows what it is to suffer." "I hate you," Clara whispered. "That is fine," Sebastian said, buttoning his coat. "Hate is a passion. I can work with passion. Indifference is what kills a marriage." He walked to the desk and pulled a bell cord. "The guest wing has been prepared for you. You will stay there tonight. Tomorrow we go to the country estate. London is not safe for us right now." "Not safe?" Clara asked, a new fear pricking at her. "Reginald knows I was planning to marry. He will be furious that I succeeded. He is not a man who loses gracefully." Sebastian walked to the door and unlocked it. He held it open, waiting for her. "Welcome to the family, Duchess. Try not to let the ghosts keep you awake." Clara stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she forced herself to walk tall. She passed him, refusing to look at his face. But as she stepped into the hallway, she heard him whisper one last thing. "You're mine now, Clara. And for your sake, you better pray I can keep you alive." As Clara walked up the grand staircase to her new prison, she realized the terrifying truth. The debt wasn't the danger. The Duke wasn't even the biggest danger. Something else was hunting them, and she had just signed herself into the center of the target. Clara awoke the next morning in a bed so vast it felt like a snowfield. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, smooth and cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the scratchy linen she was used to in her rented rooms in Cheapside. For a fleeting, blissful second, she forgot. Then the memory of the previous night crashed down on her like a physical blow. The dark study, the scratching quill, the Duke's predatory smile. Duchess of Ashford. The title felt like a yoke around her neck. She scrambled out of bed, her heart pounding. She had to know. Had he kept his word? She found a bell pull and tugged it vigorously. Moments later, a young maid with frightened eyes bobbed a curtsy in the doorway. "Your Grace rang?" "My brother," Clara demanded, clutching the silk dressing gown she found draped over a chair. "Thomas Whitmore. Is there word from Fleet Prison?" The maid stared at the floor. "The master said you would ask. He instructed me to give you this." She held out a folded newspaper. Clara snatched it. It was the morning edition of the Times. On the third page, circled in thick black ink, was a small notice in the legal section. All outstanding debts against Mr. Thomas Whitmore having been satisfied in full by an anonymous benefactor, the gentleman was released from custody at first light. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the paper to her chest. He was free. Thomas was free. A sob wrenched itself from her throat, half relief, half despair. The price had been paid. Her life was no longer her own. An hour later, she was dressed in a travelling gown of slate-grey wool, one that had mysteriously appeared in the wardrobe, perfectly tailored to her measurements. Sebastian's efficiency was terrifying. She found him waiting in the foyer. He looked immaculate, radiating power from the top of his glossy black beaver hat to the tips of his polished boots. He didn't greet her with a kiss or even a smile. He simply checked his pocket watch. "We are late," he said curtly. "The carriage is waiting." The journey out of London was a study in suffocating silence. The Blackwood carriage was opulent, upholstered in crushed sapphire velvet, with the ducal crest emblazoned on the doors. They sat opposite each other, knees almost touching in the confined space. Sebastian read correspondence, his face a mask of concentration. Clara stared out the rain-streaked window as the familiar grime of London gave way to the rolling green hills of Kent. She felt as if she were being transported to a penal colony on another continent. "Where are we going?" Clara finally asked, her voice sounding thin in the heavy silence. Sebastian didn't look up from his papers. "Blackwood Hall, my ancestral seat. It is defensible, remote and far away from my uncle's prying eyes." "How long must we stay there?" He finally looked at her, his grey eyes inscrutable. "Until I decide it is safe to return. Or until you provide me with an heir and my legitimacy is unquestionable." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. An heir. The implications of that, the physical reality of what that required, made her stomach churn. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "Do not look so revolted, Clara," he said coldly. "It is the duty of a duchess. It is what you signed up for." "I signed up to save my brother from dying in a rat-infested cell," she retorted, a spark of defiance igniting. "I did not sign up to be a broodmare for a man who despises me." Sebastian leaned forward. The sudden movement made the carriage feel incredibly small. "I do not despise you. You are inconveniently spirited, but necessary. And as for the other matter, do not worry. I am not a barbarian. I will not force myself on you until you are ready to perform your duties willingly." "Then we shall have a very long, childless marriage, Your Grace," she vowed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We shall see." As the afternoon wore on, the road narrowed, winding through dense woods that blotted out the pale sun. The air grew cooler. Suddenly the carriage lurched violently to the left. Horses screamed. The coachman shouted a warning that was cut off by the deafening crack of a pistol shot. Clara was thrown forward, landing hard against Sebastian's chest. His arms instantly went around her, iron hard, holding her steady as the carriage skidded in the mud and ground to a halt. "Stay down," Sebastian growled, his voice low and lethal. Before she could process what was happening, he had pulled a heavy flintlock pistol from a hidden compartment under the seat. He kicked the carriage door open. Outside, chaos reigned. 4 men on horseback, their faces obscured by scarves, surrounded the carriage. The coachman was slumped over the reins, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "Ashford!" one of the riders shouted, levelling a musket at Sebastian. "Your uncle sends his regards!" Clara peeked from the floor of the carriage, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a game. Sebastian had told the truth. They were being hunted. Sebastian didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired in one fluid motion. The rider with the musket grunted and reeled backward off his horse. The other 3 charged. Clara watched, terrified and mesmerized, as the devil of Blackwood lived up to his name. Sebastian moved with brutal efficiency. He used the carriage door as a shield, dodging a swinging saber. He disarmed the second attacker with a bone-crunching blow from the butt of his empty pistol, dragging the man from his saddle. It was savage. It was primal. This immaculate duke, who wouldn't touch a brooch because it was beneath him, was fighting like a street brawler in the mud. The last rider, seeing his comrades fallen, wheeled his horse around and fled back into the woods. Sebastian stood panting in the rain, his coat torn, mud splattered across his face. He looked towards the woods to ensure the threat was gone, then immediately turned back to the carriage. He yanked the door open, his eyes wild, searching the interior. When they landed on Clara, curled on the floorboards, the wildness dialed back a fraction. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, reaching in to pull her up. I don't think so," she stammered, trembling uncontrollably. He gripped her shoulders, his hands tight. He was breathing hard, and for the first time, Clara saw something behind his steel-grey eyes that wasn't calculation or coldness. It was raw, unfiltered fear. "I told you, Clara," he whispered hoarsely, rain dripping from his hair onto her face. "It is not safe. You are my wife now. That puts a target on your back just as surely as it is on mine." He looked at her for a second longer, as if reassuring himself she was whole, then released her abruptly. "We need to move. They will be back, and in greater numbers." As he turned to help the wounded coachman, Clara noticed a dark stain spreading on the sleeve of Sebastian's coat, just above the elbow. "You're bleeding!" she cried out. He glanced down at his arm with annoyance. "A scratch. It's nothing." He was lying. It was a graze from a bullet, and it was bleeding freely. But as he took charge, barking orders at the footman, binding the coachman's wound and taking the reins himself, Clara realized something else about the man she had married. He was a monster who had trapped her. But on that dark, mud-slicked road, with danger lurking in the trees, she realized with a shudder that he was also the only thing standing between her and death. Blackwood Hall was not a home. It was a statement carved in grey stone. It rose from the Kentish countryside like a jagged tooth, immense and ancient, with ivy strangling the lower floors and gargoyles leering from the eaves. It made Sebastian's London townhouse look like a cosy cottage. They arrived long after dark, exhausted and soaked. The staff waiting in the colossal entrance hall were silent and terrified, eyes downcast as Sebastian stalked past them, his arm hastily bandaged. "Mrs. Gable," Sebastian barked at a severe-looking woman in black bombazine. "Show her grace to the Emerald Suite. See that she has a hot bath and supper on a tray. I will be in the library. Do not disturb me unless the house is on fire." Without a backward glance at Clara, he disappeared down a shadowy corridor. Clara was led up a sweeping staircase that felt wide enough to drive a carriage up. The Emerald Suite was beautiful but oppressive, decorated in deep greens and heavy gold brocade. The bed had a canopy so high It vanished into the shadows of the ceiling. Clara bathed, ate mechanically, and crawled into the massive bed. The silence of the country was heavier than the noise of London. It pressed in on her ears. She lay awake for hours, listening to the wind howl around the stone towers, replaying the attack on the road. The look in Sebastian's eyes when he pulled her from the carriage haunted her. It didn't fit the narrative of the heartless villain she wanted to believe he was. The next few days set the pattern for her new life. It was a gilded cage. Sebastian was largely absent. He spent his days riding the vast estate with his stewards, or locked in his library dealing with correspondence. He was fortifying his position, preparing for whatever legal or physical assault his Uncle Reginald would launch next. Clara was left to wander the endless corridors of Blackwood Hall. It was a house full of secrets. There were portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her, accusing her of being an interloper. There were galleries filled with armor, and ballrooms covered in dust sheets that hadn't seen a party in 20 years. And there were rules. On her second day, Sebastian found her exploring the gallery on the first floor. He was dressed for riding, his presence filling the long, narrow space. "There are boundaries, Clara," he said, skipping pleasantries. "You have the run of the main house, the gardens, and the east wing, but the west wing is closed." Clara looked down the long corridor that led west, ending in a heavy oak door. "Why? Is it unsafe?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "It is private. No servants go there. You will not go there. Is that understood?" His tone was not a request. It was a command, delivered with the same cold authority he used when he bought her signature. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said meekly, dropping a curtsy. But Sebastian had miscalculated. He had chosen Clara for her desperation and her loyalty to her brother, but he had underestimated her intelligence and her curiosity. Telling Clara Whitmore something was forbidden was the surest way to guarantee she would investigate it. The West Wing became an obsession. What was he hiding? Was it a mistress, a mad relative, or something that would explain the haunted emptiness that sometimes overtook him when he thought no one was looking? The opportunity arose a week after their arrival. Sebastian had ridden out to a tenant farm on the far side of the estate to deal with a boundary dispute. He wasn't expected back until late. The evening was stormy. Thunder rolled across the Kentish hills, shaking the window panes of the great house. Clara ate a solitary dinner in the dining room that could seat 30 people. The isolation was becoming unbearable. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Clara took a candle and slipped out of her room. The house was deathly quiet, save for the ticking of grandfather clocks and the rumble of the storm outside. She found herself walking towards the west wing, almost without conscious thought. She reached the heavy oak door Sebastian had forbidden her to pass. She tried the handle. To her immense surprise, it wasn't locked. A heavy brass key sat in the keyhole. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she turned the key and pushed the door open. It groaned on unused hinges. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust, dried lavender, and something else. Beeswax? She stepped inside, raising her candle high. It was a long corridor lined with closed doors. It looked like the rest of the house, only colder, abandoned. She walked slowly down the hall, her slippered feet silent on the runner carpet. At the far end, double doors stood slightly ajar. Clara pushed them open and gasped. It was a music room. But unlike the dusty ballrooms, this room felt lived in, preserved in amber. A magnificent grand piano made of rosewood dominated the center of the space. Sheets of music were open on the stand, covered in a fine layer of dust. Clara approached the piano. The piece open was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She looked around, her candlelight casting long, dancing shadows. The room was distinctly feminine. Delicate chairs, porcelain vases filled with dried, brittle flowers, tapestry frames. Then she saw the portrait. It hung above the fireplace, dominating the room. It was a life-sized painting of a woman in a pale blue gown. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with cascading dark hair and a gentle, melancholic smile. But it was her eyes that stopped Clara's breath. They were steel grey, intelligent, piercing grey eyes. They were Sebastian's eyes. Clara moved closer, mesmerized. The resemblance was undeniable. This had to be his mother. But why hide her portrait away in a forbidden wing? Why was this room a shrine? As she leaned in to examine the brass plaque at the bottom of the frame, her foot bumped against something on the hearthrug. It was a small wooden chest, beautifully carved. The lid was loose. Clara knew she should leave. She was trespassing on deep, personal pain. Yet the mystery of the man who owned her pulled her in. She knelt and opened the chest. Inside were bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, a dried rose, and a small, leather-bound journal. Clara picked up the journal. The leather was worn smooth by frequent handling. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was hurried, frantic. October 14th, 1815. Reginald knows. I saw him speaking with the midwife. He knows my Sebastian was born before the wedding bells rang. He threatens to tell the world, to brand my beautiful boy a bastard and steal his birthright. I cannot let him. I must protect my son, even if it means making a deal with the devil himself. Oh, Sebastian, forgive me for the burden I place upon you. Clara's hands trembled so violently, she almost dropped the candle. The rumors were true. Sebastian was illegitimate, and his uncle, the man who had sent assassins to kill them on the road, had known for decades. This was the secret Sebastian was guarding with such ferocity. It wasn't just about money or titles, it was about his entire identity. His mother had lived in terror of this secret being revealed. Clara was so absorbed in the journal that she didn't hear the heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. She didn't hear the groan of the door hinges. The first warning she had was a gust of cold air and the smell of rain and wet leather. "What are you doing?" The voice was ice-cold, quieter and deadlier than the thunder outside. Clara spun around, dropping the journal. Sebastian stood in the doorway. He was drenched from his ride, his hair plastered to his forehead, his riding crop gripped tightly in his hand. His face was a mask of fury such as she had never seen. His grey eyes, his mother's eyes, burned with a terrifying light. He looked from her terrified face to the open chest, and then to the portrait above the fireplace. "I gave you one rule, Clara," he whispered, stepping into the room, his presence filling the space with suffocating menace. "One rule, and you broke it." The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than the oak beams above them. Sebastian stood frozen, his chest heaving, water dripping from his coat to form a dark pool on the Persian rug. The lightning outside flashed, illuminating the raw, jagged agony on his face. He looked like a cornered beast waiting for the final spear. "You have seen it," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "You have seen the proof that I am a fraud, that I am nothing." Clara stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. She looked at the journal at her feet, then back at the man who had bought her life. "I have seen the words of a mother who loved her son enough to die for him," Clara said softly. Sebastian let out a harsh, broken laugh. He stepped closer, the riding crop twitching in his hand. "Don't romanticize it, Clara. It is a confession of sin. My father was already married to a woman in France when he seduced my mother. I am a bastard. If that book leaves this room, I lose everything. The title, the lands, the name. I become a pauper." He loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Is that your plan? To take this to the courts? To annul the marriage on the grounds of fraud and take your freedom back?" Clara looked into his eyes, the storm-grey eyes of the woman in the painting, and saw the terrified boy hiding behind the mask of the Iron Duke. He expected betrayal, because betrayal was all he had ever known. She did something reckless. She reached out and took the riding crop from his hand. He was so shocked he let her take it. She tossed it onto the armchair. Then she reached down and picked up the journal. Sebastian flinched, his muscles coiling as if to snatch it back. Clara walked to the fireplace, where the embers were still glowing red. She held the journal over the heat. "What are you doing?" Sebastian breathed. "I am your wife, Sebastian," Clara said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I signed a document. I gave you my loyalty. You bought my brother's life. I will not sell yours for a moment of freedom." She dropped the leather-bound book onto the coals. "No!" Sebastian lunged forward, but he was too late. The dry paper caught instantly. The flames licked up the spine, curling the pages, turning the secret of his birth into ash and smoke. He stared at the fire, stunned. He watched the evidence of his shame burn until it was nothing but grey dust. Slowly he turned to look at her. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound confusion. "Why?" "Because you are my husband," Clara whispered, "and because I think you are a better man than you believe." Sebastian stared at her for a long moment, the air between them vibrating with a new, terrifying tension. Then he broke. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbing her face in his large, rough hands. He didn't kiss her gently. He kissed her with the desperation of a drowning man finding air. It was a kiss of possession, of gratitude, of overwhelming relief. Clara melted into him. The fear that had defined their marriage evaporated, replaced by a heat that rivaled the fire in the grate. She wrapped her arms around his wet coat, pulling him closer, anchoring him. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, his voice was ragged. "I thought you would destroy me." "I am not your enemy, Sebastian," she said, tracing the line of his jaw. "We are in this together now, against Reginald, against the world." "You are a fool, Clara Whitmore," he murmured, brushing a thumb over her lip. "But you are my fool." That night, Sebastian did not return to his own chambers. He stayed in the Emerald Suite. There were no more transactions, no more cold bargains. There was only the storm outside, and the man who slowly, layer by layer, let himself be loved for the first time in his life. But happiness, in the house of Blackwood, was a fragile thing. 2 days later, the storm had passed, leaving the sky a bruised purple. Sebastian and Clara were in the library, working on the estate ledgers together, a true partnership, when the heavy doors banged open. It was not a servant. It was not Reginald. It was Mr. Finch, the nervous solicitor from London. He was dishevelled, covered in mud, and gasping for air. "Your Grace," Finch wheezed, collapsing against the doorframe. "You must flee, now!" Sebastian was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Clara and the door. "Finch? What is the meaning of this?" "Your uncle," Finch choked out. "He didn't just want to expose you, Your Grace. He grew tired of waiting for the courts. He has hired the Black Guard." Sebastian's face went pale. The Black Guard were mercenaries, ex-military men with no honor and no mercy. They were illegal, expensive, and deadly. "They are coming here," Sebastian demanded. "They are already on the grounds," Finch cried. "They cut the telegraph wires. They killed the gatekeeper. They have orders to burn the hall to the ground, with everyone inside." As if to punctuate his words, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence from the floor below. Then the smell of smoke began to drift up the grand staircase. "Clara," Sebastian said, turning to her. His eyes were hard, the Iron Duke returning in full force. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Run to the stables. Take the grey mare. Ride for the village and ring the church bells. Summon the militia." "I won't leave you. You must." Sebastian grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "I can hold the main hall. I can buy you time. But I cannot fight them if I am worried about protecting you. Go. If you stay, we both die." He kissed her hard, a goodbye that tasted of ash, and shoved her toward the servants' passage hidden behind the bookcase. "Go, Clara, run!" Clara scrambled into the dark passage, tears streaming down her face. She heard the library doors smash open behind her. She heard the clash of steel. She heard Sebastian roar, and then she ran. The servants' passage was a labyrinth of cobwebs and cold stone, smelling of damp earth. Clara stumbled through the dark, her hands scraping against the rough walls, guided only by the faint draughts of air. Above her, the muffled sounds of violence echoed, gunshots, shouting, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. "He is fighting for me," she thought, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I have to save him." She burst out of the hidden exit near the scullery. The kitchen was empty, but the orange glow of fire was already reflecting off the copper pans hanging from the ceiling. Smoke billowed from the main hallway. The heat was intensifying. Clara didn't go to the stables. She knew Sebastian's plan was flawed. The militia was miles away. By the time they arrived, Blackwood Hall would be a pyre, and Sebastian would be a corpse among the ashes. She needed to stop this now. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the kitchen hearth and crept toward the main hall. The scene was a nightmare. The grand foyer was filled with smoke. Furniture was overturned. 3 men in dark military coats lay motionless on the marble floor. In the center of the chaos, Sebastian was fighting 2 men at once. He was a whirlwind of motion, his sword flashing in the firelight. He moved with a lethal grace, parrying a saber thrust while landing a brutal kick to the other attacker's knee. But he was tiring. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, blood blinding his left eye. And watching from the top of the stairs, safe above the fray, stood a man with silver hair and a cruel, aristocratic face, Lord Reginald. He held a pistol in one hand, casually aiming it down at the melee, waiting for a clear shot at his nephew. Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate. "Reginald!" she screamed, her voice piercing the din of battle. Reginald turned, startled by the woman emerging from the smoke like a vengeful spirit. "Ah!" Reginald sneered, leveling the pistol at her instead. "The little shopkeeper's daughter, the fake Duchess." "Let him go!" Clara shouted, gripping the iron poker. "My dear, the time for negotiation is over," Reginald laughed. "I am going to kill him, and then I am going to kill you, and history will say it was a tragic fire that claimed the last of the Blackwood line." Below, the distraction cost Sebastian. One of the mercenaries landed a heavy blow to his ribs. Sebastian went down to one knee, groaning. "Sebastian!" Clara cried. Reginald smiled and cocked the hammer of his pistol. "Goodbye, Duchess." Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the pain. But it never came. Instead, a grunt of surprise came from the top of the stairs. Clara opened her eyes. Reginald was staggering. He looked down at his chest, where a blossom of red was spreading rapidly across his white cravat. He looked up, confusion marring his features, and then toppled forward, falling over the banister and crashing onto the floor below with a sickening crunch. Standing in the shadows of the upper gallery, holding a smoking musket, was Thomas, Clara's brother. He looked pale, thin and terrified, but his aim had been true. "Thomas!" Clara gasped. I came to thank him," Thomas stammered, his hands shaking as he lowered the heavy gun. "I heard the shooting. I found the armory." Below, the mercenaries froze. Their paymaster was dead. The job was over. Sebastian seized the moment. Ignoring his injuries, he rose with a feral snarl, thrusting his sword upward. "Leave or join him!" The mercenaries looked at the dead Lord Reginald, then at the blood-soaked Duke who refused to die, and finally at the boy with the musket. They dropped their weapons and fled into the night. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire eating the curtains. "Put it out," Sebastian barked, the adrenaline finally fading as he slumped against a pillar. "Get the servants! Save the house!" Clara rushed to him. Dropping the poker, she fell to her knees in the soot and blood, frantically checking his wounds. "You're alive!" she sobbed, pressing her hands to his chest to feel the beat of his heart. Sebastian winced, but covered her hands with his own. He looked up at Thomas, who was descending the stairs, looking green. "You have terrible timing, Mr. Whitmore," Sebastian rasped, a weak smile tugging at his mouth. "But excellent aim." 3 months later. London was blanketed in snow, a pristine white layer covering the grime of the city. The courtroom at the Old Bailey was packed. It was the scandal of the decade. The Crown versus the estate of Lord Reginald Blackwood. Even though Reginald was dead, his lawyers, men paid in advance to destroy Sebastian, were pressing the claim of illegitimacy. They wanted the title stripped, the assets seized by the Crown. They wanted to prove that Sebastian Blackwood was a fraud. Sebastian sat in the defendant's box, looking calm, almost bored. His arm was still in a sling, a reminder of the night of the fire, but he was immaculately dressed in black velvet. Clara sat in the front row, Thomas beside her. Thomas looked healthier now, well-fed and dressed in a fine suit, working as Sebastian's new estate manager. The prosecutor, a vulture of a man named Sir Horace, was pacing in front of the judge. "The fact remains, my lord," Sir Horace boomed. "There is no marriage certificate for the late Duke and the French woman. Therefore, the defendant is a bastard. He has no right to the title, no right to the fortune, and certainly no right to sit in the House of Lords. The Blackwood estate must revert to the Crown." The judge looked over his spectacles at Sebastian. "Does the defense have anything to refute this? We have heard rumors of a journal, but it was apparently destroyed." Sebastian stood up. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at Clara. "I do not deny the circumstances of my birth," Sebastian said, his voice ringing clear through the hush of the courtroom. "My mother was unwed. By the strict letter of the law, I am illegitimate." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clara gripped her hands together. What was he doing? He was throwing it all away. "However," Sebastian continued, reaching into his breast pocket, "the prosecution is focused on the wrong document." He pulled out a piece of parchment. It was creased, worn, and stained with ink. Clara's breath hitched. It was the loan agreement, the one she had signed that first rainy night. "When I married Miss Clara Whitmore," Sebastian said, handing the document to the bailiff, "I had my solicitor, Mr. Finch, draw up a unique contract. You will find, if you read the addendum in Clause 4, a specific provision." The judge took the paper, adjusting his glasses. He read in silence for a long minute. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "Read it aloud, my lord," Sebastian challenged. The judge cleared his throat. "Clause 4. In the event of any challenge to the Duke's title, legitimacy, or life, all assets, lands, monies, and holdings of the Blackwood estate are immediately and irrevocably gifted, via inter vivos, transfer to his legal wife, Clara Elizabeth Blackwood. This transfer supersedes all hereditary claims." The courtroom erupted. Sebastian turned to the prosecutor, a smirk playing on his lips. "You see, Sir Horace, you can strip me of my title. You can take my name. You can call me a bastard. But you cannot touch the money or the land, because I don't own them." He pointed at Clara. "She does." Clara sat stunned. He had done it. On the very first night, when he was trapping her, he had actually been insuring her. He had handed her the keys to his kingdom before he even knew if he could trust her. He had protected her from the very beginning. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" When silence fell, the judge looked at Sir Horace. "The Crown has no claim on private gifts between husband and wife. The title may be in abeyance until the king decides, but the Blackwood fortune belongs to the Duchess." Sir Horace slammed his papers down in defeat. They walked out of the court into the crisp winter air. The paparazzi of the day, sketch artists and gossips, were shouting questions, but Sebastian ignored them all. He led Clara to their carriage. Once inside, with the curtains drawn, Clara turned to him, hitting him lightly on the chest. "You gave me everything?" she asked, incredulous. "That first night? You barely knew me." Sebastian captured her hand and kissed the knuckles. "I told you, Clara, I am a gambler. I looked at you and I saw someone who would fight for what was hers. I bet everything on you." "And the title?" she asked. "You lost your title." "Let the king keep the title," Sebastian said. pulling her onto his lap, heedless of his injured arm. "I have the only title that matters." "And what is that?" Clara whispered, leaning into him. Sebastian smiled, the genuine, warm smile that transformed his face. "Husband." The carriage rattled off into the snow-covered streets of London, carrying not a duke and his victim, but a man and a woman who had signed the wrong document, only to find it was the rightest thing they had ever done. And just like that, the contract that was meant to be a prison became a promise. Sebastian and Clara proved that sometimes love isn't about soft words and easy days. Sometimes it's about standing back to back while the world burns down around you. What a ride! I still can't believe he gave her the entire estate on the first night. That is the definition of a power move. So here is my question for you. If you were Clara, would you have forgiven Sebastian for the initial deception? Or is a marriage based on a trap never truly valid? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of danger, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a scandalous Victorian mystery coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.